Warm welcome to your evening news update for Thursday, April 22. Prime Minister Mottley this evening announced a further ease in restrictions as COVID-19 cases continue to fall, but the island appears set to remain under a state of emergency for another 5 months. At a national address from Alara Court this evening, Attorney General Dale Marshall says Parliament will convene a special session tomorrow to debate the resolution.
So long as that resolution is approved, the state of emergency would continue from the 26th day of April until the 25th day of September. These are not decisions that we take lightly. They're decisions that we take armed with the best information available, mindful always that the interests and lives of Barbadians is of paramount importance to us.
Once legislators give the nod, there will be no curfew from Monday to Wednesday, but the curfew will extend from Thursday through Sunday from midnight to 5 a.m. Prime Minister Mottley then announced a series of new measures which will run for 3 weeks.
We've also agreed to open back up the drive-in and the cinemas, and they're subject to some very stringent protocols that have been established by the Chief Medical Officer and the COVID monitoring unit, including, I'm told, ensuring that no more than 25 persons remain in the concession area where food or drink are supplied within the cinemas or the drive-in at any one time. And those areas will be heavily monitored by the COVID monitoring unit. We're also, with respect to churches, agreeing that communion can take place, limited to individual servings of the sacrament, and I believe that the Ministry of Health is reaching out to the Barbados Christian Council and the Evangelical Council to ensure that there is no misinterpretation as to what is being permitted by the Chief Medical Officer. Similarly, baptisms may resume with masks and face shields to be worn by all persons, including the officiants.
In addition, some sports will now be allowed, but with tight restrictions.
Subject to the prohibitions that I'll announce in a second, all sporting activities may resume for practice only. Sporting bodies must submit the intended protocols to the COVID monitoring unit for the prior approval of the unit. Having said that, we're not yet in a position to allow basketball, netball, wrestling, rugby, or horse racing, and for different reasons. Yes, football and cricket can continue, but for practice, not tournaments. So over the course of the next 3 weeks, practice and training, spectators will not be allowed at any sporting activities. However, essential support personnel for the sporting training may be there.
Meanwhile, face-to-face classes will not resume as originally scheduled next week as cleanup operations to rid school plants of ash continues. The Prime Minister announced that online classes will resume on April 27 for students, while teachers will report for duty 1 day earlier.
Let me say that I really feel for our children, and it is therefore going to require extraordinary support on the part of all of us, because they have had their tuition displaced not just by COVID, but now by the ash at critical times for some of them. And to that extent, I expect that all of the stakeholders will work seamlessly in the Ministry of Education to ensure that we are in a position truly to be able to reinforce and to close the gaps that might have existed over the course of the last year with respect to the education of our children.
In other news, the COVID-19 cluster at a church in the north has negatively impacted yet another facility. At this evening's press conference, Health and Wellness Minister Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Bostic said not only is the Queen Elizabeth Hospital suffering fallout, but now a day nursery has been affected.
You would have heard about the cluster of security officers and the stressed security officers at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. We now have a total of 11 positive cases from the security guard section at the hospital. And there has been a link, and there is a link between the security guards and that cluster and this church from the north. We also had 3 cases from the nursery, and all of those are being managed at this point in time with people being tested and awaiting second test results. But all of the cases and all of the institutions are connected to the church and the nursery.
Minister Bostic praised those church members who responded to the call to step forward for testing, but he made it clear the situation was unacceptable.
And I can only describe that kind of behavior and what we have observed as being irresponsible and reckless. It's behavior that we cannot tolerate, behavior that we would not like to see happening again in this country where all of us are being put at risk.
There's regional and international news after this short break.
Barbados Today, news you can trust.
To regional news, Guyana's Chief Education Officer, Dr. Marcel Hudson, today announced that some national assessment and examinations will not be written this year in light of the severe impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on schools.
The national grades 2, 4, and 9 and the placement examinations will not be written in 2021. We recognize the hardships our students would have been experiencing in terms of their readiness and preparedness for these examinations, and we also recognize the need for us to ensure that our students are safe. So as a result, what we will see is the private schools who are desirous, students from the private schools who are desirous of entering the public schools will be placed at the school awarded from the results of the National Grade 6 assessment. In addition, remigrant learners will be placed in appropriate List A and B secondary schools closer to their homes. Please note that the Assistant Chief Education Officers and the Regional Education Officers will be responsible for ensuring that the process is done with the greatest degree of efficiency and effectiveness.
On the international scene, at least 24 COVID-19 patients in Western India died on Wednesday when the oxygen supply to their ventilators ran out amid a nationwide shortage of the gas and a surge in infections.
It's a race to secure oxygen as hospitals across India run dangerously short of the crucial supply and scramble to meet demand.
Last night, my wife told me she wasn't getting oxygen, that the hospital wasn't providing it to her. I spoke to a few officials and everyone said we're checking, but nobody was checking. And in the morning, I was told that my wife had died.
India has been in the grips of a deadly second wave, in part due to a double mutant believed to be more transmissible than the original strain. The situation has become so desperate that some distraught relatives of COVID patients are looting hospitals to hoard oxygen tanks. Criticized for a slow response, the government sought to reassure the public that supply is on the way.
That's news, but for the very latest, visit our website at www.barbadostoday.bb. You can also subscribe to our e-paper, email updates, or like us on Facebook, and sign up for our breaking news alerts via WhatsApp. We're also on Izumi Media and bus terminals, as well as Screenplay at supermarkets and gas stations near you. You can also hear us on Mix 96.9 FM and Capital Media HD 99.3 FM.